To speak of heroism after Berlin is to grasp numbers written in blood and memory. The RAF campaign against Berlin, which intensified in late 1943, became less a battle for the city than a night-by-night struggle for survival, Webreise, Webfear. Black Thursday and subsequent missions stretched the limits of endurance, courage, and luck itself, each statistic a testament to both victory and devastation. This was the twilight of faith in precision. Orders came down. Strike at the heart with area bombing, trusting in technology, Pathfinders colored flares, and crews worn ragged by repeated sorties web. Over 2,500 aircraft could be dispatched in a single night. Most were Lancasters, revered for their payload and endurance, yet despised for their vulnerability in the teeth of flak and fighters' web, Webaditi. Harris's bomber command pressed on, convinced that a sustained offensive would finally break German resolve. Recent tactics exploited the longer winter nights. Formation flying under darkness created a relentless rhythm. Crews survived by ritual, every takeoff a prayer, every acknowledgement of bombs away a bargain with fate. The Pathfinders, highly trained and dogged by exhaustion, staked their lives on finding a clear gap in the clouds to lay green ground markers. Their sky markers, cascading through the fog, decided which zones would become funeral pyres, Webb and Wibiata. For Edwin Carter and his squadron, each briefing became a recitation of risk. Casualty rates were officially unsustainable, the odds 5.8% loss, over 500 aircraft and thousands of young airmen dead or captured in the 16 major raids of the campaign Webtown's Web Cell. Among the Canadians flying Lancasters, a chilling calculation revealed that more crews had vanished than in any other group, up to 14 from a single squadron in a month, requiring total replacement just to continue the offensive web. At such rates, survival itself was a form of rebellion against the gathering dark. Inside each bomber, this knowledge hung heavy. Discipline in the face of dread became a form of resistance. Men called out flak bursts in clipped tones, coordinated evasive turns, checked for fighters in silence, and clung to the routine of navigation, checking bearings even as calamity annihilated formation mates behind them. Crew members were bonded by shared rituals, the pilot's steadying hand on the throttle, the gunner's slow scan through gun sights, the wireless operator's constant stream of Morse communications that seemed to conjure phantom hope with each message sent out into endless night. The Lancaster itself became both a prison and a sanctuary. The tight arrangement of men, machines, maps, and the perpetual hum of engines endured as long as courage outlasted terror web. Loss was calculated even as survivors gasped for air after missions. Some nights only half the force would return. Technicians would count bombers on the tarmac at dawn, their tallies short by dozens. Empty bunks in barracks were the clearest measure, silent memorials to those lost in searchlights and smoke. Mechanics traced flak damage with cold hands, marking each scar as a sign of fortune or fate. Edwin's flawed map, more artifact now than instrument, remained a symbol of the campaign's paradox, that imperfection could become salvation. He folded it again each mission, less out of necessity than superstition. Other navigators, hearing his story, began to question their own minor errors and reconsider the strictest doctrines of procedure, knowing that improv and intuition had perhaps bought them life. Even as war punished those who hesitated, Webumana Diwangsis, each dawn, after the bombers returned, Berlin counted its wounds. The devastation on the ground rivaled the mourning in English air bases. In one December raid, nearly 1,750 civilians were killed, with 7,000 wounded and 180,000 left homeless. Factories burned, a church's dome vaporized. Goebbels wrote in shock about transportation collapse and blazing fires everywhere, Webenuste. For Berliners, the air was thick with smoke and memory. For aircrews, the sky was marked by ghosts, friends and rivals claimed by the indifference of fate. Survival became the crew's quiet prophecy. Whether driven by error, intuition, or the desperate gamble of a navigator's useless mapfold, every mission was a question answered only by dawn. In the aftermath, men struggled to find comfort in their luck, knowing that each night turned some survivors into legends and others into ghosts, measured forever in the reckoning of numbers and the ache of memory. The night above Berlin was a black sea set aflame by tracers and flak, every ripple echoing with the cries of war. One by one, Allied bombers pierced the darkness, engines bellowing, steel bellies packed with a payload meant to change the course of history. Down below, the city's lights flickered in feverish anticipation, as if Berlin itself held its breath, caught between hope and dread. Within one aging Lancaster cockpit, a prophecy was manifesting in silence and sweat. Sergeant Edwin Carter, a navigator haunted by both mathematics and fate, hunched over his battered charts under the sputter of a red lamp. The aircraft vibrated with the chorus of its crew's unease, a pilot's knuckles white on the yoke, the bombardier's whispered tally of bomb bay doors, an engineer's anxious scanning of dials and needles. The night's mission: survive the gauntlet and return while hundreds would not. Tonight, a cruel trick of fate, or perhaps a blessing wrapped in human error, would tilt the scales. Edwin's chart, vital and creased, taunted him with a stubborn fold he could never flatten, a flaw dismissed by his peers as useless. But as the bomber droned north over enemy territory, this single fold would become the instrument that blurred the line between ghost and survivor. The prophecy outside the windows was fire and iron, but inside it was memory and fear. Edwin remembered the morning's briefing. "Berlin again," the commander intoned, eyes grave. "We expect heavy losses, straight runs and tight formations." The plan was precise, but war is a storm, not a clock. The crew said nothing, their faith invested in their machines, their leaders, and above all, the thin promise of luck. In the unsteady hush before the flak started, Edwin's mind flashed to tales of ancient strategists, generals who'd claimed victories with nothing but the placement of a banner or the turn of a road. Could a navigator's mistake, a trivial crease, hold such power? Somewhere above the clouds, destiny circled, waiting for men to stumble into its embrace. As the bomber rolled onward, the drone of engines mingled with unseen omens. The radio squawked, distress calls static, the terse instructions of command. The city's dark shape began to emerge on the horizon. Above, the northern lights glimmered pale green, a cold beauty ignorant of the world's suffering. The mood inside the craft thickened. Every man understood, deep in the marrow, that not all would return. Edwin Carter, wrapped in sheepskin layers and his own sense of insignificance, stared one last time at the infamous map. Training had taught him to trust his instruments and his procedure. Experience had taught him to distrust everything that seemed too certain. This city, which had claimed the dreams of so many, now called out for new ghosts. "ETA 12 minutes, he muttered, forcing confidence. The pilot's reply was a grunt, no words wasted when none could matter. Lancaster NFD pressed on, shrouded by its roaring escort of fear and anticipation. Below them, the Kammhuber line's fingers stretched hungrily, radar and searchlights scratching at the sky. In the bomb bay, sweat mingled with condensation, dripping onto racks of explosives. Every crew member pretended to busy himself. The tail gunner caressed his barrels. The engineer counted anxiously. The wireless operator tapped out a half-hearted Morse. Each man privately measured the distance between his courage and the inevitability of nightfall. It was then, as if guided by fate, that Edwin's gaze fell upon the useless fold, an imperfection that always sent his bearings a few precious miles off course. Irritated, he started to flatten it, then hesitated, an inexplicable impulse stalling his hand. What if tonight his imperfection could forge a path where none existed? What if, by deviating from certainty, he might slip through the net cast by enemy guns? Outside, the first flak erupted, a blossom of black cloud and shrapnel. The plane shuddered. Another minute, and they'd be over the city. "Almost there," whispered the bombardier, voice thin with dread. The wireless operator caught Edwin's eye, as if to ask whether his numbers could conjure a miracle. Edwin offered no reassurance, only a thin, tired smile. Suddenly, an ear-splitting explosion rocked the formation to starboard. Another Lancaster burst into flame, its silhouette tumbling earthward. The sky was alive with chaos and the wailing agony of dying men, testament to the certainty of the prophecy. Tonight, many would be claimed by Berlin's dark hunger. Edwin's hands trembled as he double-checked his bearings. Logic screamed, "Adjust the course, follow orders." But a deeper whisper insisted, "Trust the imperfection, the fold that no man could explain away." "Turn 2 degrees east," he called out. the words nearly lost amid the cacophony. The pilot, desperate for anything resembling hope, banked slightly, threading a path through the maelstrom. As NFD's new heading cut a subtle arc, they slipped from one searchlight's grasp to another's indifferent beam, almost as if the bomber itself had vanished, a ghost trailing just outside the enemy's reach. Down below, Berlin erupted in a tapestry of orange and crimson. Yet high above the flames, one battered Lancaster glided untouched, seen only in flashes and half-memories by those who manned the guns below. No prophecy, Edwin realized, is written without the ink of error or the trembling hand of chance. Even as the bombs fell and death hammered the city, a single navigator's useless mistake became the slender thread suspending a crew between destruction and deliverance. With each passing second, NFD's fate became a question not of maps or mathematics, but of faith in the very imperfections that make men human, and in times of war, sometimes untouchable. As dawn threatened the horizon, painting Berlin's ruins in sorrowful light, Edwin Carter stared out the porthole, at the city, at the heavens, and most of all at the map that had, for one impossible night, folded his bomber into the shadows. They had survived, to tell a story not of heroism alone, but of the mysterious and haunted ways in which war rewrites the rules, and how sometimes the tiniest of errors can outwit the gravest designs of fate. As the Lancasters surged forward, the city of Berlin simmered beneath a shroud of tension, the anticipation of doom falling thick as the winter fog masking the approach. The target for tonight's raid was deep, defended on all sides by the ruthless resolve of the Nazi capital, anti-aircraft batteries, searchlights, and night fighters lying in savage wait for the invaders go Web P. Cain Web. Edwin Carter, hunched behind his battered navigation table, felt the weight of history breathing down his neck. His chart, creased, flawed, dismissed as folly, now seemed almost sacred, a talisman set against the chaos unspooling outside. The bomber's crew relied on him more than ever. Winds howled across the North Sea, shoving formations off their designated run, while unpredictable weather threatened to scatter the raid, as if some ancient storm god were waking in the night. Web. Within the cockpit, conversations thinned to essentials. "Steady as she goes," the pilot barked, voice tight with dread. Above and below, enemy radar networks probed for weak spots. The Kammhuber line's infamous pockets searched for anything out of place. It was another prophecy realized. In war, the tiniest deviation could tip a man between salvation and oblivion. For Edwin, every second stretched into eternity. He worked calculations with trembling hands, seeing beyond the doctrine. He knew now that rigid obedience to planned routes could lead the crew straight into hell. Tracer rounds arced upward, painting spectacular agony against the night. The aircraft quivered as the first shells burst nearby, iron shrapnel singing a song of predation. "Hold your heading," Edwin insisted, voice borrowed from fate itself even as terror gnawed at his resolve. Lancasters peeled off and rejoined, lost in the smoke and confusion. Ahead, flak batteries opened in coordinated fury, filling the sky with lethal webs. The crew braced for impact with each bone-rattling boom, relying on both discipline and superstition to hold together. Frantic Morse tapped out on the wireless. The gunner rotated in a slow ballet, seeking the jagged silhouettes of enemy fighters. Wobby's Web. As they closed on Berlin's center, the city transformed into a chaotic tapestry of searchlights and flame. Below, centuries of architecture had surrendered to ruin. Above, mechanisms of fate tested the resolve of every soul on board. Tonight, fools would meet heroes and only destiny would decide who was who. Suddenly, the world exploded. A Lancaster to starboard vanished in a blossom of fire. Edwin's crew, eyes hollowed by fear, watched their comrades fall in silence, the prophecy written in every crumpled fuselage and every unfinished story. Against all odds, Edwin's subtle course adjustment, guided by the map's stuttering fold, had slipped them just outside the kill zone. The approach to the target was frantic, nearly blind. Pathfinders dropped red flares, but confusion reigned. Heavy winds carried bombers off course, making destructive accuracy nearly impossible. Many dropped bombs on faith and desperation, hoping to dent Berlin's unyielding facade. Edwin pleaded with numbers, not for perfection now, but for survival, a margin measured in luck, intuition. As the flawed geometry of war web is web it is web yours. Bomb doors snapped open. Explosives, coaxed and primed, tumbled into the void, seeking their mark in darkness. The city shuddered again. Beneath, above, inside, the souls of men who knew their choices mattered only until chance rendered them powerless. The return was hell made manifest. Luftwaffe night fighters picked off stragglers with ruthless expertise. Lancaster losses mounted, each a confession of faith in the hope that some crews might yet escape fate's grasp. Edwin, eyes fixed on his haunted chart, calculated a route home, letting his useless fold steer them clear of known ambushes. A decision born not from heroism, but from exhaustion and haunting intuition. Webkey. Berlin burned, yet the bomber survived, bloodied, battered, but not claimed. As dawn crept over the bombed city, Edwin Carter and his crew crossed back over hostile ground, wounded but intact, each man forever transformed by a night where error and genius became indistinguishable. In this, the prophecy was fulfilled. Imperfection itself had outwitted annihilation, forging legends in the smoke of the impossible. December 16, 1943, etched a nightmare into the memory of every Lancaster crew who soared across the North Sea that bitter evening. Webb. Known forever as Black Thursday, it was a night when fate revealed its most savage face, snatching away certainty and replacing it with the sudden void of loss. Nearly 300 RAF airmen would not live to see another dawn, a tragedy so colossal that its shadow would darken Bomber Command's halls for decades to come. Edwin Carter's hands trembled as he adjusted their course. Fog and worsening weather had already cursed both takeoff and return. At English airfields, ice coated the fuselages and visibility shrank to perilous inches. But far worse was the gauntlet awaiting in the skies over Berlin. 483 Lancasters and 15 Mosquitoes pressed into the city's teeth that night, each one marked by hope, purpose, and the chilling possibility of annihilation. Webb's Fuhn. Their run to the target meant passing through the Kammhuber line, Germany's radar and defensive belt, a sinister spider's web laid to catch the unwary. Air crews knew the odds and trusted to luck, training, and the spectral geometry of their navigation charts. Edwin's useless fold still cut through the center of Berlin across his battered map. Yet in the confusion wrought by weather, anti-aircraft storms, and the chaos of hundreds of bombers, this flaw began to prove its worth. Winds carried formations off their tracks. Pathfinders were scattered, and their marking flares fell wide of the intended aiming points. Radio commands barked desperate course corrections. Amid this confusion, Edwin made the call, break 2 degrees east, and his pilot, pressed by flak and shrieking fighters, obeyed. In Lancaster NFD's narrow world, war was a test of endurance and improvisation. The bomber leveled as Berlin burned below, vast swathes of the city hammered by incendiaries. Tonight, destruction leapt across neighborhoods as Tiergarten, Charlottenburg, and Schöneberg turned to embers. The Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church collapsed, embassies crumbled, and a city renowned for culture became a tableau of agony. Streets glowed with the unnatural light of firestorms, while the sky aloft throbbed to the angry roar of engines and the wild staccato of guns. The minutes before the bomb run stretched endlessly. The crew watched tracer shells climbing all around, painting orange arcs over the city and splintering the night. Edwin ran his finger across that stubborn fold, realizing now that their route had cut just outside the densest flak convergences. In the intercom, voices were taut, sometimes panicked, sometimes eerily calm, the language of men who had spent too long with death as a companion. From the cockpit, the pilot called out, "Markers missing. Bomb on main fires." With visibility crippled by clouded horizons and enemy smoke, Edwin's amended route led them to an infernal mosaic on the ground instead of an assigned target indicator. Bomb doors opened. "Ready," the bombardier whispered, hands slick with sweat. Explosives dropped away, slipping into Berlin's chaos in a moment that shrank eons of terror into a heartbeat. Their mission would mark another wound in the city, another memory for the few who would live to recall that night. Webb. The return flight was another gauntlet. As the bomber stream fled Berlin, the Germans directed night fighters along predicted escape paths. Only Edwin's mistake veered them into a thin corridor of turbulence, odd bearings, and relative darkness. 23 Lancasters were shot down over enemy territory. Another 17 limped home with flak damage or fighter wounds. Webb. The death toll climbed as the fog thickened over every English airbase. Exhausted crews scrambled to land in blinding mist, wheels scraping past unseen obstacles, engines sputtering, nerves frayed to the breaking point. In Binbrook, loss was palpable. 11 of 460 Squadron's Lancasters had vanished that month, their crews' names inscribed forever on the walls of memory web. For survivors like Edwin Carter, guilt mingled with gratitude. Had the useless fold truly spared them? Or was it merely the will of capricious fate? Heavy-hearted, he made the final calculations for descent, guiding NFD to ground with the last ounces of focus he could muster. Daybreak revealed the cost. Crews gathered in silence, counting empty bunks and shattered machines. Techs toiled over battered wings and fuselages, marking every wound with grim expertise. The city of Berlin steamed still beneath its curtain of smoke, a wounded giant battered but unbowed. Black Thursday lingered in every breath. Edwin, his chart crumpled in hand, peered through the frost-rimmed window. Somewhere in the wreckage of that night, he sensed a story scrabbling for survival. The Navigator's flaw, a map's crease that had divided doom from hope. It was a lesson passed between men. Sometimes destiny reveals its true form in imperfection. Sometimes the ghost in Berlin's fires is the voice of luck itself, whispering that life and death are decided not by certainty, but by the stones we stumble over in darkness. To speak of heroism after Berlin is to grasp numbers written in blood and memory. The RAF campaign against Berlin, which intensified in late 1943, became less a battle for the city than a night-by-night struggle for survival. Webb rise, Webb fear. Black Thursday and subsequent missions stretched the limits of endurance, courage, and luck itself, each statistic a testament to both victory and devastation. This was the twilight of faith in precision. Orders came down. Strike at the heart with area bombing, trusting in technology, Pathfinder's colored flares, and crews worn ragged by repeated sorties. Webb. Over 2,500 aircraft could be dispatched in a single night. Most were Lancasters, revered for their payload and endurance, yet despised for their vulnerability in the teeth of flak and fighters' web. Webbaditi. Harris's bomber command pressed on, convinced that a sustained offensive would finally break German resolve. Recent tactics exploited the longer winter nights. Formation flying under darkness created a relentless rhythm. Crews survived by ritual, every takeoff a prayer, every acknowledgement of bombs away a bargain with fate. The Pathfinders, highly trained and dogged by exhaustion, staked their lives on finding a clear gap in the clouds to lay green ground markers. Their sky markers, cascading through the fog, decided which zones would become funeral pyres. Webb and Wibiata. For Edwin Carter and his squadron, each briefing became a recitation of risk. Casualty rates were officially unsustainable, the odds 5.8% loss, over 500 aircraft and thousands of young airmen dead or captured in the 16 major raids of the campaign. Webb so. Among the Canadians flying Lancasters, a chilling calculation revealed that more crews had vanished than in any other group, up to 14 from a single squadron in a month, requiring total replacement just to continue the offensive. Webb. At such rates, survival itself was a form of rebellion against the gathering dark. Inside each bomber, this knowledge hung heavy. Discipline in the face of dread became a form of resistance. Men called out flak bursts in clipped tones, coordinated evasive turns, checked for fighters in silence, and clung to the routine of navigation, checking bearings even as calamity annihilated formation mates behind them. Crew members were bonded by shared rituals, the pilot's steadying hand on the throttle, the gunner's slow scan through gun sights, the wireless operator's constant stream of Morse communications that seemed to conjure phantom hope with each message sent out into endless night. The Lancaster itself became both a prison and a sanctuary. The tight arrangement of men, machines, maps, and the perpetual hum of engines endured as long as courage outlasted terror. Webb. Loss was calculated even as survivors gasped for air after missions. Some nights only half the force would return. Technicians would count bombers on the tarmac at dawn, their tallies short by dozens. Empty bunks in barracks were the clearest measure. silent memorials to those lost in searchlights and smoke. Mechanics traced flak damage with cold hands, marking each scar as a sign of fortune or fate. Edwin's flawed map, more artifact now than instrument, remained a symbol of the campaign's paradox, that imperfection could become salvation. He folded it again each mission, less out of necessity than superstition. Other navigators, hearing his story, began to question their own minor errors and reconsider the strictest doctrines of procedure, knowing that improv and intuition had perhaps bought them life. Even as war punished those who hesitated, Webumana Duangsis, each dawn, after the bombers returned, Berlin counted its wounds. The devastation on the ground rivaled the mourning in English air bases. In one December raid, nearly 1,750 civilians were killed, with 7,000 wounded and 180,000 left homeless. Factories burned, a church's dome vaporized. Goebbels wrote in shock about transportation collapse and blazing fires everywhere. Webenuste. For Berliners, the air was thick with smoke and memory. For air crews, the sky was marked by ghosts, friends and rivals claimed by the indifference of fate. Survival became the crew's quiet prophecy. Whether driven by error, intuition, or the desperate gamble of a navigator's useless mapfold, every mission was a question answered only by dawn. In the aftermath, men struggled to find comfort in their luck, knowing that each night turned some survivors into legends and others into ghosts, measured forever in the reckoning of numbers and the ache of memory. Berlin's nights in late 1943 were stitched with dread and destruction. Each raid was a gamble, a test of endurance and luck stretched to its breaking point. For the crews of Lancaster bombers, every takeoff for Berlin felt like volunteering for a lottery in which the margin for error was measured in lives and the shadow of death hung over entire squadrons. The scope of the Battle of Berlin defied comprehension. 16 major raids over several months unleashed devastation on both city and airmen. Almost 4,000 Berliners were killed, 10,000 injured, and 450,000 made homeless. The campaign cost Bomber Command more than 500 aircraft, their crews either killed or captured. The loss rate peaked at 5.8%, numerically above the threshold Bomber Command considered barely sustainable. December 1943 proved catastrophic. 11 crews lost from No. 460 Squadron RAF alone, with another 14 gone in January and February. At such rates, entire squadrons were wiped out and had to be rebuilt almost monthly. Year after year, families mourned vanished sons, husbands, fathers. Each mission pushed men and machines to their limits. On the infamous night of 16th of December, dubbed Black Thursday, 483 Lancasters and 15 Mosquitoes launched for Berlin, departing airfields in England through worsening fog. Route planners risked flying across the North Sea, then over Holland and northern Germany. German radar tracked the bomber stream with sinister precision, directing night fighters and flak batteries into ruthless pursuit. 23 Lancasters were shot down that night. 17 returned with catastrophic damage. Inside his aircraft, Navigator Edwin Carter relied on flawed instruments and the haunted superstition of his useless mapfold. As the formation approached the German capital, discipline dissolved into instinct. Pathfinders struggled to lay accurate flares. Confusion cast the bombers into a scatter, splitting up and missing assigned target markers. Edwin's deviation broke NFD away from converging lines of deadly fire, a sliver of accidental luck, separating his fate from those who would vanish in the flames. On the ground, Berlin was transformed by each raid. The November 22nd attack killed 2,000 civilians and left 175,000 homeless. The next night, another 1,000 lost their lives and 100,000 more lost everything. Each December night added hundreds of deaths and tens of thousands to the ranks of the dispossessed. Factories, churches, and landmarks crumbled under the hailstorm of high explosives, incendiaries, and phosphorus bombs. Survivors wandered in dazed horror among ruins lit by infernal fire, refugees in their own city. In the bombers above, survival was a ragged calculation. Losses and victories blurred. Crews mourned friends lost in burning fuselages, celebrated the miracle of return, and measured success not by targets hit, but by lives still present at dawn. Even so, for every man spared, a dozen paid the price with vanished names and broken families. The numbers painted the campaign's brutality. On the night of November 18, 19, Bomber Command sent 440 Lancasters to Berlin, supported by squadrons of Halifaxes, Stirlings, Wellingtons, and Mosquitoes. The burning lasted just over an hour, unloading more than 1,575 tons of bombs. Losses included 9 Lancasters, and crews killed, captured, or forced to evade. Berlin confirmed 154 civilians dead, 443 injured, 7,500 made homeless. In the tide of reprisal and defense, every statistic was a story half-written, a tale cut short by battle's indifference web on web. Squadrons moved through a rhythm of agony. Reports from airbases counted empty beds and quiet mess holes. Technicians marked every hole and gouge with the grim precision of undertakers. Commanders struggled to write condolence letters, explaining loss to mothers and wives with words that could never match the truth. For Edwin, his battered chart now felt like an artifact of war, a symbol not of flaw but of adaptation. The tale of his ghostly flight over Berlin circulated among other navigators, spawning new rituals and uncertainty. Men began to question the rigidity of pathfinding doctrine, wondering whether fate preferred the unplanned, the barely understood. Some folded maps intentionally, seeking luck in error and chaos. In Berlin, rage and sorrow mingled with endurance. Goebbels himself described blazing fires everywhere. Transportation conditions are quite hopeless. Civilians retreated into shelters, knowing every night could be their last. The city's scars multiplied, but resolve hardened in the crucible web. The war had turned everyone, pilot, navigator, child, refugee, into a marcher through the reckoning by fire. As 1943 drew to a close, legends were written in survival. Squadrons commemorated the lost, but found quiet pride in the haunted luck of those returned. The ghost stories grew, of bombers invisibly steered by useless mistakes, of maps whose flaws pointed to salvation. For Edwin Carter, every new mission was a question. When would luck disappear, and when would the reckoning devour even the wisest man's hope? The fog thickened in memory, but dawn's truth remained. Above Berlin, in the heart of fire, some survived by numbers, some by error, all by the fragile miracle of endurance under an unbearable sky. Night after night, the war over Berlin unfolded in patterns both familiar and terrifying. Those who flew in the belly of the great Avro Lancaster bombers felt each mission as a descent into chaos, their destinations mapped in secrecy and fear, web in web. The reality of total war pressed down upon every crew, tightening with each raid. The Battle of Berlin, stretching from late August 1943 through the winter, shattered any illusion of surgical warfare. In total, Bomber Command generated over 10,800 sorties against Berlin, with roughly 9,560 reaching the target and 33,390 tons of bombs, high explosive and incendiary, raining down on the ancient city web. More than 500 bombers were lost during the campaign. Crew casualties reached into the thousands, each loss a ripple across families and squadrons back in England. Webtightingmeister. The mechanics of the raids grew ever more precise, even as the cost soared. The path to Berlin was guarded by the lethal phalanx of the Kammhuber line, German night fighters poised, and flak batteries in dizzying density. Early raids in August and September 1943 saw losses of up to 7.7%, already considered unsustainable, but the pursuit of a decisive blow drove Bomber Command to continue, hoping longer winter nights would fatten the odds. Webb says, Edwin Carter navigated these nights with a battered map, where his infamous fold split Berlin nearly in two. The fold, that accident both mocked and feared, became a symbol among his squad. Should they follow the neat geometry of high command, or accept the distorted sense of direction drawn by luck itself? Stories spread. Other crews began to tweak their own navigation, seeking safety in the obsolete, trusting hunches as often as official doctrine. Each mission blurred into the next. Bomb lifts in English drizzle, a heavy breakfast eaten in silence, the taste of fear never absent, the thunder of engines and the moment when aircraft slipped through clouds, leaving behind the thin, scattered lights of home. Over the North Sea, flak patterns were memorized. Known killers circled on maps. The wisdom of those already lost passed along in whispered warnings. On 19 November 1943, Bomber Command sent 440 Lancasters to Berlin. Almost half of the force came from 1 Group and 5 Group. The raid dropped 1,575 long tons of munitions. Gathered in the darkness, these bombers represented the heart of the British bomber fleet. Of those Lancasters, 9 were lost, a 2% loss rate for the night, but on other raids loss rates soared towards 5.8%, a breaking point for morale. Crews prepared for the next night's departure regardless. So many knew each flight might be one's last, yet the campaign stretched on regardless. The destruction on the ground was unimaginable. In just 2 nights of November bombing, 3,000 Berliners died. 250,000 left homeless. December's attacks pushed that toll higher, and by the spring of 1944, 10,000 Germans, military and civilian alike, were dead. Goebbels watched his capital burn, admitting blazing fires everywhere. Transportation conditions. Hopeless. Web 50. Berlin's wounds deepened and the city's spirit refused to yield. Against all destructive power, the largest Allied bomb load could not break Berlin's will, nor could it spare its bombers from disaster. After each raid, victory and defeat mingled uneasily. Success was mapped in bombs dropped, damage inflicted, and sometimes survival against all expectation. The Lancaster, capable of carrying 14,000 pounds of bombs, was the spearhead, its vulnerability lying in its very strength. In the turning of the war, the reckoning for both city and crew was savage. 25 bombers lost from 1 squadron alone in 3 months, requiring rebuilt formations and endless training of fresh recruits. For many, the rhythm became ritual. Fly, hope, mourn, and fly again. They held on to anything that might buy a margin. The error in a chart. The rumor that an odd-making fold or offbeat course could foil a waiting flak battery or a lurking night fighter. As the winter ground on, Edwin and his fellow airmen placed their trust equally in skill and in the strange comfort of flawed artifacts. Ghost stories multiplied. The tale of a navigator whose bomber vanished from the path of death, or whose useless fold left him skirting a kill zone while others vanished, became the talk of squadrons hoping for luck and redemption. Discipline warred with superstition, and both found a place in men who faced fire each night. Says, Berlin, meanwhile, was transformed forever. The scars in the earth and the souls of its people grew with every attack. Yet the city endured. And back in the English squadrons, the battered survivors counted their blessings each morning, keeping silent account of the rituals that, in a world overturned by war, might tip destiny to their side for one more night under ruin's shadow. The reckoning that followed the Battle of Berlin descended like a shroud over both the haunted city and the men who carried its destruction from above. For the air crews, especially those inside the Avro Lancasters, the final missions of late 1943 and early 1944 brought a reckoning written in numbers, memories, and the silence of survivors who counted their luck against the certainty of loss. These nights were no longer just calculated offensives. Each raid stretched the RAF Bomber Command beyond humane limits. The threshold of maximum sustainable operational loss set by commanders was a chilling 5%. Yet throughout the Berlin raids, loss rates soared well past this boundary, with entire squadrons wiped out and rebuilt in the span of weeks. December 1943 saw 11 crews from No. 460 Squadron vanish, while January and February claimed another 14. The total, over 500 bombers lost in 16 Berlin raids, more than 2,960 crew dead or missing, and nearly 1,000 taken prisoner. It foretold a grim prophecy. At this pace, Bomber Command would have been wiped out before Berlin. For those who returned, the cost was counted not only in friends lost, but also in the city beneath their wings. On 22 November 1943, one raid killed 2,000 civilians and rendered 175,000 people homeless. The next night, another 1,000 perished and 100,000 more sought shelter. Each December and January raid added between 20,000 and 80,000 homeless. By campaign's end, nearly 4,000 Berliners were dead, 10,000 injured, and 450,000 made refugees in their own capital. Resistance in the city stiffened. Goebbels himself called the conditions quite hopeless, as flames devoured whole districts and transport lines collapsed. Web. Those numbers, passed in briefings and written in condolence letters, etched a deeper divide in the souls of survivors like Edwin Carter. Each mission was a strange mixture of ritual and dread. Over 513 Lancasters, 271 Halifaxes, 137 short Sterlings and flankers like the Mosquitoes launched nightly, 440 Lancasters alone, tasked to Berlin in just one November operation, dropping nearly 1,600 tons of bombs. The path to Berlin was mapped in nightmare. Kammhuber line defenses, fields of radar and artillery, and the ceaseless search for gaps. A game of chance where even minor, useless quirks in navigation could mean the difference between oblivion and survival. Web-tanged web fix. In every Lancaster cockpit, decisions balanced between calculation and faith. Edwin's infamous map fold remained an artifact, the small error whose curious deviation guided his crew away from doom on more than one night. Other navigators, hearing his tale, began re-examining the strictest routines, taking calculated risks where charts felt too certain. Some folded their own maps, others trusted luck in darkness, and all hoped for just one more dawn. Berlin beneath the bombers was remade, street by street. The city's wounds bled into the earth. New statistics each morning signaled neighborhoods destroyed, blazing fires everywhere, and transportation in ruins. Somewhere in the chaos, survivors picked their way through rubbled homes seeking loved ones, clutching memories. Yet the resilience of its people became legend. No bombardment, no matter how colossal, fully broke Berlin's will to endure. Web. Back at RAF bases, dawn was bittersweet. Men gathered in the quiet of pre-dawn, scanning the empty ranks, awaiting the engine roars of friends who would never return. The mechanic's ritual was somber: chart each damage, patch up the lucky, and silently record the missing. Commanders wrote letter after letter, trying to describe courage and compassion in the measured sadness of official words. Survival was only half the story. To live after Berlin was to carry searing memories. Crew members measured every risk, every act of improvisation, against the certainty of statistics unyielding in cruelty. Edwin Carter, his ghost bomber story whispered in mess halls, became a touchstone for faith in imperfection. Some called it luck, others fate. Still more saw it as the only mercy left in that dreadful campaign. By the spring of 1944, both sides had learned that not every prophecy could be fulfilled through technology or brute force. The British bombers could smash the city's stones. Berlin's defenders could slay dozens of the invaders nightly. But the human spirit, navigators clutching flawed maps, Berliners digging through burning streets, endured beyond logic and expectation. Mission by mission, the legacy of the Berlin raids expanded. The echoes of devastation lingered in both survivors' hearts and the rebuilt capital, a landscape of ashes, stories, and legends etched into the marrow of a generation. The war moved on, but its lessons, its tragedies, and its flukes of salvation lived on in every retelling. And the superstition of the useless fold, born of error, memory and hope, remained a whispered promise among those who tempted fate above the burning earth. Sometimes, against all odds, a ghost slipped through fire, leaving only silence and remembrance in its wake, a last defiant echo where ash and memory entwined. If you've stood with us through the thunder of history, you know there's always more beneath the surface. Hit subscribe now and ring the bell, because every story of war, courage, and consequence deserves to be told. Join our ranks, dive deep into the untold battles, and become part of the mission to remember. Your next chapter starts here.